The Federation of Aligned Worlds had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of bureaucratic condescension, and they had gotten remarkably good at it. Their latest masterpiece was the Treaty Summit at Orbital Platform Designation, Haven 7, a name that would prove to be cosmically ironic within the next few hours. The platform itself was a monument to excess, all crystalline spires and gravity-defying architecture that screamed, "We have too much money and not enough taste." It orbited a neutron star, because apparently, standard suns were too pedestrian for interstellar peace negotiations. The summit was meant to end a 17-year conflict between the Anthari Dominion and the WXN Collective, 2 civilizations that had been trying to murder each other over mining rights to a binary asteroid system. Neither side particularly cared about the asteroids anymore. They were just too proud to stop shooting. This was where diplomacy came in, that noble art of convincing people that not killing each other was somehow in their best interest, and this was where humanity came in, though nobody could quite explain why. The human delegation consisted of exactly 1 person, which should have been the first warning sign that something was cosmically amiss. She stood in the docking bay, watching her shuttle depart with the kind of expression that suggested she knew exactly how this day was going to end. Her credentials identified her as a 3rd-tier diplomatic attaché, the kind of position that exists solely to fill seats at events where actual important people might get bored. She wore the standard-issue human diplomatic uniform, which looked like someone had tried to make a business suit threatening and failed spectacularly. The Anthari escort, who met her at the airlock, was a 7-foot mass of chatin and poorly disguised contempt. His translator unit crackled as he spoke. "You are the human representative? The entire delegation? Apparently I drew the short straw," she replied, adjusting the datapad on her hip. "Or someone in the assignment office hates me." "Probably both." The Anthari made a sound that his species used to indicate bewilderment mixed with pity. Humans were the galaxy's favorite joke, a species that had barely crawled out of their own atmosphere before stumbling into a cosmos that had been civilized for millennia. They came from a planet classified as a Class 9 death world, which sounded impressive until you realized they had somehow evolved to be physically inferior to almost every other spacefaring species. No natural armor, no venom, no psionic abilities, no redundant organs. They were soft, slow, and possessed of a baffling optimism that suggested they had no idea how outclassed they were. The galactic community kept them around mostly for entertainment value, and because humans made excellent mediators. Something about coming from a world where everything was actively trying to kill you made you very good at finding middle ground. Also, nobody took them seriously enough to bother assassinating them, which made them ideal neutral party. This logic was about to be tested in ways that would require entirely new philosophical frameworks. The summit chamber was exactly as pretentious as expected. The ceiling displayed a real-time holographic feed of the neutron star below, because nothing said peace like a constant reminder of violent cosmic forces. Representatives from 47 different species occupied the various seating configurations, each designed to accommodate their specific biological requirements. The human diplomat was assigned a seat near the back, naturally, where her presence could be acknowledged without anyone having to actually look at her. The negotiations proceeded with all the efficiency of continental drift. The Anthari wanted full control of the asteroid belt. The WXN wanted full control of the asteroid belt. Various other species proposed compromises that both sides rejected with identical vigor. The human representative said nothing, mostly because nobody asked her opinion. She spent most of her time reading reports on her datapad and occasionally glancing at the chronometer, as if she had somewhere better to be. She did not, but optimism was a human trait. 4 hours into the summit, right around the point where several delegates had begun openly napping, the station's defensive grid went offline. This happened so smoothly that most occupants did not notice until the hegemony strike force materialized from jump space approximately 300 meters from the hull. The hegemony was what happened when you gave a species with conqueror delusions access to military hardware and a complete lack of diplomatic subtlety. They had been waiting for an opportunity like this, a chance to eliminate leadership from multiple rival factions in a single strike while framing it as an unfortunate accident. The fact that a major diplomatic summit was taking place at a neutral station was not a bug in their plan. It was the entire point. The first missile impact sent tremors through the superstructure, Emergency klaxons began their panicked wailing as atmosphere vented from 3 separate hull breaches. The summit chamber, to its credit, was designed for exactly this scenario. Blast doors slammed down, backup life support engaged, and armed security details materialized from hidden alcoves. The human diplomat looked up from her datapad with the expression of someone whose pessimism had just been validated. "Well," she said to nobody in particular, "this is about right." The hegemony forces boarded through the hull breaches with the kind of overwhelming force that suggested they were compensating for something. They were Hurigot, a species that looked like someone had tried to design a bear using only hatred and poor lighting. They hit the security forces like a meteor strike, cutting through defensive positions with weapons that made conventional firearms look like children's toys. The delegates, to their credit, did not panic immediately. They had a solid 30 seconds of composed terror before the screaming started. The human diplomat stood, calmly collected her datapad and began walking toward the emergency exit. Her security detail, 2 Felnari guards who looked like bipedal wolves, moved to flank her. They made it approximately 15 feet before a plasma burst caught both of them. They went down hard, armor melting, biological systems shutting down in the way that evolution had optimized for minimum suffering. She kept walking. An Urgat soldier stepped into her path, weapon raised, mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Human, you are worth nothing to us. You are not even worth killing." "That seems inefficient," she observed. "If I am worth nothing, why waste time telling me?" The soldier backhanded her casually, the kind of blow that would have shattered bone in most species. She hit the wall hard enough to crack the composite paneling and slid to the floor in a heap. The soldier turned away, already forgetting she existed. This was a mistake, though he would not live long enough to recognize it. The hegemony forces spent the next 20 minutes systematically executing delegates and eliminating resistance. They were professional, efficient, and thoroughly convinced of their own superiority. They left the human diplomat where she fell, not even bothering to confirm a kill. Humans were fragile. Humans did not survive blunt force trauma to the head followed by 3 hours of oxygen deprivation while the life support system was sabotaged. Humans were defenseless. The hegemony commander, a scarred veteran named Grutek, who had seen combat on 14 worlds, stood in the central chamber surrounded by bodies and declared victory. His troops would hold the station, claim the attack was perpetrated by unknown raiders, and be gone before anyone could mount a proper investigation. It was a clean operation. Efficient. Perfect. He glanced once at the human's crumpled form in the corridor, and dismissed her from his thoughts entirely. The station's lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized on emergency power. In the silence that followed, nobody heard the soft, ragged breathing from the corridor. Nobody noticed the hand that slowly, painfully began to move. Evolution on Earth had taught humanity many lessons. The most important was this. You do not have to be the strongest to survive. You do not have to be the fast. You just have to be too stubborn to die when everything rational says you should. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The hegemony had a saying about conquered territory. A secured station is a silent station. Grutek had personally verified this truth on 43 separate occasions throughout his military career. Haven 7, for the first 6 hours following the massacre, adhered to this principle beautifully. The bodies remained where they had fallen, the environmental systems hummed along on emergency protocols, and his troops established defensive perimeters, with the kind of relaxed efficiency that came from knowing all threats had been neutralized. Hour 7 was when things stopped making sense. It started with the small things, the kinds of discrepancies that soldiers trained to notice felt in their gut before their conscious minds could process them. Private Holnock reported that surveillance feeds from Section D were displaying a 3-second delay that had not existed during the initial sweep. Corporal Ventus mentioned that the temperature in the eastern corridors had dropped by 4 degrees despite no apparent damage to the climate control systems. Neither issue seemed critical. Stations were complicated. Systems malfunctioned. This was normal, except nothing about Heaven 7 was normal anymore. And the universe was trying very hard to communicate this fact through increasingly unsubtle hints. The first body was discovered in Junction 12, a maintenance intersection that connected the primary habitation ring to the industrial sector. The corpse belonged to Private Skolon, who had been assigned to patrol routes deemed so low priority that command had essentially forgotten about him. He had been a competent soldier, experienced, cautious, the kind who survived wars by being thoroughly unremarkable. Someone had removed his helmet and broken his neck with enough force to partially decapitate him. The walls around his body were decorated with arterial spray in patterns that suggested his death had not been quick. More disturbing was the complete absence of defensive wounds, or evidence that he had drawn his weapon. Whatever killed him had done so before he could register it as a threat. Grutek examined the scene with the mounting unease of a predator, realizing the food chain might be less straightforward than advertised. Energy signatures? None, Commander. His tactical officer replied, running a scanner over the corridor. No plasma discharge, no ballistic residue, no chemical traces. Whatever did this used physical force exclusively. The human diplomat. Grutek said it like a statement, but even he could hear the question mark his brain was attaching to the end. Commander, the humans sustained catastrophic injuries. No species survives that level of trauma without immediate medical intervention. Certainly not humans. They barely qualify as durable by galactic standard. Grutek had been a soldier long enough to know that sentences beginning with no species tended to age poorly. Find the body. Confirm the kill. The search team reported back within the hour. The human was not where they had left her. Blood trail suggested she had dragged herself approximately 30 meters before the trail vanished, at an access hatch leading into the station's maintenance network. The hatch had been sealed from the inside. She is injured and hiding, Ventus offered, trying very hard to sound confident. We will flush her out. One human cannot threaten a full military occupation. Grutek wanted to believe this. The alternative required reconsidering fundamental assumptions about prey species and their capacity for violence. He assigned 2 full squads to sweep the maintenance tunnels, equipped with thermal sensors and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. Both squads went silent 40 minutes later. The recovery team found them scattered across 3 separate junction points in the sub-level network. Whatever had killed them had done so with methodical precision, picking them off one at a time despite them maintaining communication and standard tactical formation. The wounds were savage, brutal in a way that suggested intimate familiarity with ergot anatomy. Throats torn out, eyes punctured, the weak points in their armor exploited with surgical accuracy. Most disturbing were the traps. Someone had turned the maintenance network into a killing field using nothing but station components, and apparently infinite patience. Pressure plates rigged to seal blast doors, coolant lines rerouted to flood corridors with liquid nitrogen, gravity generators modified to create localized fields that turned up, down, sideways into nightmare configurations of broken bones and ruptured organs. Grutek stared at the tactical display showing the locations of his dead soldiers, and felt something he had not experienced since his first combat deployment. Fear, not the healthy caution that kept soldiers alive, but the primal recognition that something with more teeth had entered the hunting ground. Humans are tool users, his intelligence officer said, pulling up data files with hands that shook just slightly. Their evolutionary advantage was supposedly problem-solving and endurance, not combat capability. This does not match the psychological profile. Then the profile is wrong. Grutek pulled up everything the hegemony had on humanity, which was disappointingly little. Earth. Class 9. Death World. Gravity 1.2 standard. Atmospheric oxygen concentration 21%. Average lifespan 73 cycles. Military capacity minimal. Threat assessment negligible. Someone had made a catastrophic error in threat assessment. The thing about evolution on Death Worlds was that it did not breed specialists. It bred survivors. Every ecosystem on Earth had apparently spent 4 billion years perfecting the art of creative murder, and humanity had somehow thrived by becoming the universe's most persistent nightmare. They were not stronger than predators, so they learned to outlast them. They were not faster than prey, so they learned to track them until exhaustion made the kill inevitable. They were not equipped with natural weapons, so they learned to turn everything into a weapon. And now one of them was loose on a station full of people who had made the fatal mistake of assuming fragility meant harmlessness. Hour 14 brought the collapse of perimeter security on the northern habitation ring. No breach, no attack. The soldiers simply stopped reporting. When Grutek sent a squad to investigate, they found the defensive position empty except for equipment. The soldiers had vanished, weapons left behind, as if they had simply decided to stop existing. They found the bodies in the waste recycling system, all 12 of them. They had been herded there somehow, though security footage showed nothing but static. Whatever did the herding had known exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. Grutek made the decision that would haunt his military record. Full lockdown. All personnel to return to the central hub. Abandon the outer sections entirely. Let the human have the maintenance tunnels and the dark corridors. They would hold the command center with its reinforced bulkheads and automated defenses. They would wait for the extraction fleet. They would survive. This plan had the virtue of being logical and the disadvantage of being completely wrong. The environmental systems began failing in sequence. Not catastrophically, but with targeted precision. Oxygen levels dropped to 14% in the southern habitation ring, which was lethal to Rugat, but merely uncomfortable for species adapted to low oxygen environment. Temperature spiked to 45 degrees in the barracks, forcing troops into lighter armor. Humidity climbed to saturation levels, making thermal sensors useless. Someone was rewriting the station's environmental parameters to create an ecosystem specifically hostile to hegemony physiology. Commander, his communications officer said quietly, "We are receiving a message. Audio only. Source is internal but location cannot be traced. Play it." The voice that came through the speakers was human, female, and so casual it bordered on obscene. "You should leave. Not a threat. Observation. You are in an environment optimized for species that evolved in comfort. I evolved in a place that spent millions of years trying to kill my ancestors. You are not equipped for this." Grutek found his voice. "You are one individual. Injured. We are 73 trained soldiers with military-grade equipment." 73, she corrected. "You were 96 when you started. Math is important. Also, I am not injured anymore. Human healing is inconvenient but effective. We scar quickly. Everything on Earth has to, or it dies." The transmission cut out. Grutek looked at his tactical display, at the shrinking green indicators representing his troops, at the red zone spreading across the station map like infection. "Send the distress signal," he said quietly. "Priority Alpha. Request immediate extraction." The communications officer worked his console, then looked up with eyes that had gone very wide. "Commander, the communications array has been physically disabled. Someone cut the primary feed lines. Secondary systems also disabled. Backups are routed through sections we no longer control." Grutek understood then, with the clarity that came from watching all tactical options collapse simultaneously. They were not occupying the station. They were trapped in, with something that had been systematically isolating, studying and dismantling them for 14 hours. Somewhere in the dark, in the cold corridors filled with thin air and broken machines, something that evolution had spent millions of years teaching to hunt, was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, surviving, and everything else was just obstacles to be removed.
Hour 19 marked the point where military discipline began fracturing into something that resembled organized panic. Grutek had consolidated his remaining forces into the command center, a fortified sphere of reinforced alloys and redundant systems that should have been impregnable. 61 soldiers, down from 96, armed with enough firepower to level a city block. They had supplies, they had defensible positions, they had every tactical advantage except the one that mattered. They did not know what they were fighting. The command center's security feeds showed nothing. Empty corridors, flickering lights, the occasional shadow that might have been movement or might have been failing optics. The human never appeared on camera, which meant she either understood surveillance systems better than military engineers, or had found ways to move through spaces that should not accommodate living beings. Both possibilities were equally disturbing. "She is one human," Ventus said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself rather than Grutek. "We established this. One individual cannot defeat a military force through attrition." "Tell that to the 35 soldiers who are dead," Grutek replied, studying the station schematic with the growing certainty that he was missing something fundamental. The answer came in the form of a history file that his intelligence officer had dredged from the humans' diplomatic credentials, Earth military doctrine, specifically a concept they called persistence hunting. Humans had evolved on planes where prey animals were faster and stronger, so human ancestors learned to simply follow them. Not chase, follow, walk after them for hours, days if necessary, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, then move in for the kill. This is not possible in a station environment, the intelligence officer said, but he did not sound convinced. There is nowhere to run. Endurance is irrelevant. Grutek looked at the chronometer. 19 hours. His troops were exhausted, rotating on minimal sleep, jumping at shadows. The human had been injured, had lost blood, should have been operating at diminished capacity. Except humans apparently did not diminish the way rational species did. They had this trick, this biological absurdity, where stress hormones overrode pain and damage, letting them function on borrowed time that evolution had stolen from their future selves. The technical term was adrenaline. The practical term was nightmare fuel. The lights went out. Not all at once. That would have been almost merciful. Instead, sections of the command center went dark in sequence. Emergency lighting failing to engage. Backup systems refusing to respond. Grutek's troops activated weapon-mounted illuminators, creating overlapping fields of harsh white light that somehow made the darkness beyond seem more absolute. She cannot access this system, Ventus said, checking his tactical pad with hands that betrayed his words with their trembling. Command center power grid is isolated, hardened against intrusion. The ventilation kicked on with a sound like something screaming in a language composed entirely of metal fatigue. Air started flowing, but wrong, moving in patterns that created pressure differentials and wind tunnels where none should exist. Several soldiers reported difficulty breathing as oxygen concentration shifted unpredictably. Grutek understood. She was not trying to kill them with the environment anymore. She was hurting them, using atmospheric pressure and light patterns to push them into specific formations, specific positions, like a predator maneuvering prey toward a cliff edge. The first soldier died when a maintenance panel exploded outward with enough force to embed shrapnel in his chest. The second died when a support beam, weakened by carefully applied plasma scoring, collapsed onto his position. The third and fourth died when the floor beneath them simply ceased being floor, a section of decking that had been cut away and balanced so precisely that it held until weight shifted at exactly the wrong angle. None of these deaths involved the human direct. She was letting the station kill for her, turning the environment itself into a weapon. Fall back to secondary positions, Grutek ordered, watching his tactical display disintegrate into chaos. Soldiers scattered, abandoning formation, seeking cover that did not exist in a space that had been systematically compromised. That was when she appeared, not on the cameras, in person, standing in a doorway that should have been sealed, wearing maintenance coveralls that were approximately 60% blood by volume. She looked like something evolution had assembled from spite and scar tissue. One eye was swollen. Her left arm hung at an angle that suggested improvised field repair of a compound fracture. She should have been in shock in a medical pod, in a grave. She smiled instead. Humans have this concept, she said, conversationally, as if discussing weather patterns rather than systematic murder, called the winner effect. Fight or flight response gets stuck on fight. Brain chemistry rewrites itself. Pain becomes information instead of limitation. We get very good at not dying when we should. A dozen weapons swung toward her. She moved before triggers could be pulled, dropping through a floor hatch that had not existed 3 seconds ago. Return fire punched holes in bulkheads, but found only empty space. The deaths that followed stopped being tactical casualties, and started being object lessons in how thoroughly Earth's evolution had optimized humanity for creative violence. Soldiers died in their defensive positions from attackers who came through walls, through ceiling panels, through spaces that should not accommodate a human frame but apparently did when sufficiently motivated. She moved through the station like water, finding cracks, exploiting every weakness in their formation with the kind of precision that came from hours of observation. Because that was what she had been doing, learning, watching, understanding how they moved, how they thought, where their tactics created vulnerabilities. Humans were not faster or stronger, but they were frighteningly good at pattern recognition and adaptation. Give a human time to study a problem, and they would find ways to solve it that violated every reasonable assumption about the problem's parameters. Grutek found himself in a corridor he did not recognize, separated from his troops by a blast door that had sealed with suspicious time. His tactical display showed soldiers dying in clusters, green indicators winking to red with mechanical efficiency. 43 soldiers, 37, 29. She dropped from a ventilation shaft behind him with all the grace of a malfunctioning asteroid. He spun, managed to raise his weapon halfway before she was inside his reach, doing something to his arm that involved leverage and the sound of joints separating. His weapon clattered away. She stepped back, breathing hard, favoring her injured side. "Your mistake," she said, blood running from her nose, was assuming fragile meant defenseless. Earth made that mistake for 4 billion years. Everything that made that assumption is extinct now. We are not strong. We just refuse to lose. Grutek tried to respond but found his translator had been damaged in the brief exchange. She watched him with her remaining functional eye, head tilted like a predator evaluating whether prey was worth the energy expenditure. "You can leave," she said finally. "Take whoever is left. Get off this station. Tell your commanders that humans might be weak, but we are the species that evolved to outlast gods. We are too stubborn to die, and too vindictive to forgive. We are what happens when a death world runs out of things to kill us, and decides to teach us to kill back." She disappeared back into the ventilation system, leaving Grutek with a dislocated shoulder and the kind of existential terror that would require entirely new therapy protocols. The survivors, 23 soldiers who had somehow avoided death through luck or incompetence, evacuated on emergency shuttles 6 hours later. They left behind 73 bodies, a compromised station, and one human who had turned a diplomatic summit into a case study on why you never ever underestimate what 4 billion years of spite-driven evolution can produce. The last transmission from Haven 7 before communication protocols were re-established was audio only. The human's voice, calm and terrifyingly casual. "Extraction team can arrive whenever. I will be in the command center. Tell them to bring medical supplies and something for the pain. Also coffee. Definitely coffee." The galaxy would spend the next decade trying to process what had happened. The humans spent it waiting for pickup and reorganizing the station's filing system, because apparently bureaucratic efficiency was how her species processed trauma. Some species feared death. Humans organized it into alphabetical order, and made it fill out the proper paperwork. The investigation team arrived 31 days after Haven 7 went dark, which was approximately 29 days longer than optimal and 2 days shorter than the bureaucratic nightmare of assembling a multi-species forensic unit would typically require. They approached the station with the kind of caution normally reserved for active munitions or philosophical debates about consciousness, which was appropriate given that nobody knew what they would find inside. What they found was a crime scene that violated several fundamental principles of forensic science, and at least 2 laws of physics. Director Yaldrin of the Federation Investigation Bureau had examined disaster sites on 47 worlds. He had seen battle damage. He had seen terrorist attacks. He had seen one memorable incident involving a malfunctioning gravity generator and a cargo bay full of livestock that required therapy afterward. Nothing in his 30 years of experience had prepared him for. The station was intact, mostly, which was the first disturbing sign. Battles left damage patterns. Energy weapons scored walls. Explosives created predictable blast rate. Haven 7 looked like someone had carefully disassembled 73 soldiers using only patience and profound understanding of structural engineering. Bodies were distributed across 17 different sections in configurations that suggested they had been positioned deliberately, arranged to tell a story for anyone capable of reading it. The story was horrifying. Environmental systems were weaponized, his technical analyst reported. A Pelnari who normally maintained the emotional range of granite, but currently looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. Atmospheric composition was modified and localized. Temperature variance created stress fractures in armor. Gravity generators were reprogrammed to create fields that should not be possible without causing structural collapse. "Show me," Yaldrin said, though he suspected he would regret this request. The security footage had been compiled from 17 different sources, pieced together where gaps existed, analyzed frame by frame. What emerged was a timeline that made less sense the more complete it became. The human diplomat appeared periodically, moving through the station like she understood its geometry better than the engineers who built it. She avoided cameras when convenient, used them to misdirect when necessary, and occasionally stared directly into lenses, with an expression that suggested she knew exactly who would be watching this footage, and wanted them to understand something important. The important thing was this: she had won not through superior firepower or tactical advantage, but through weaponized persistence and complete willingness to turn her own body into a resource to be expended. "Here," the analyst said, freezing footage from hour 7. "She is using a maintenance shaft too small for standard humanoid frames. Medical scans we recovered from the diplomatic records indicate she sustained 4 fractured ribs during the initial attack. Moving through this space would have caused catastrophic additional damage, but she did it anyway, repeatedly. We tracked her through sections where atmospheric pressure was insufficient for sustained consciousness, where temperature reached levels that should have caused systemic organ failure. She kept moving. Humans apparently have this biological absurdity, where their brain can override damage warnings when survival requires it." Yaldrin had heard of this shock, adrenaline response, the concept that a species could temporarily ignore the fact that it was dying in order to complete necessary tasks. It had always seemed like exaggeration, the kind of mythology species created around their warriors. The footage suggested it was understating the problem. They found her in the command center, exactly where her transmission had promised. She was sitting in the station commander's chair, feet propped on a console reading a datapad. She looked up when they entered, acknowledged them with a nod, and went back to reading. "Medical team is standing by," Yaldrin said carefully, approaching like she might be an unexploded device. "You should be in critical condition." "I was," she replied without looking up. "Got better. Mostly. Still have some internal bleeding that should probably be addressed eventually. But I finished organizing the casualty reports and updated the station logs. Seemed important." A medic scanned her and made a sound that Yaldrin's translator interpreted as profound medical distress. "She has 15 distinct untreated injuries, any 3 of which should have been fatal. Her body appears to be held together primarily through scar tissue, and what I can only describe as aggressive willpower." The human finally set down her datapad, and looked at Yaldrin with eyes that had seen something fundamental break and decided to keep working anyway. "You want to know how one human killed 73 soldiers? The question has been raised. I did not kill 73 soldiers. I killed maybe a dozen directly. The station killed the rest. I just convinced it we were on the same side." She gestured at the command console. "Stations are complicated, lots of interlocking systems that normally work together, but can be persuaded to work against specific outcomes, like keeping large aggressive aliens alive and comfortable. You turned the entire station into a weapon. I turned it into an environment. Earth is an environment, a really unpleasant one that spent millions of years teaching my ancestors that the universe does not care about fairness or mercy, only about who adapts fastest. You cannot fight an environment. You can only survive it or not." The investigation took 6 weeks. They documented every death, every trap, every modification she had made to station systems. They reconstructed her path through 17 different sections, mapped where she had hidden, where she had planned, where she had waited for exhaustion and paranoia to do most of her work. The hegemony soldiers had not lost a battle. They had lost a war of attrition against an opponent who understood that victory did not require being stronger, only being too stubborn to die. The final report ran to 400 pages, and included 16 different recommendations for updating threat assessment protocols regarding human capabilities. The summary was shorter. Do not assume weakness means helplessness. Do not trap humans in enclosed spaces. Do not give them time to adapt. Do not, under any circumstances, make them angry and then fail to confirm the kill. The diplomatic fallout was spectacular. The hegemony attempted to frame the incident as human aggression, which became difficult when footage showed them executing delegates and leaving bodies in corridors. 3 governments collapsed. 17 trade agreements were renegotiated. Humanity's diplomatic status was quietly upgraded from harmless novelty to treat with extreme caution. The human herself was offered commendations, medals, speaking engagement. She declined all of them and requested transfer to a research station studying extremophile bacteria, because apparently surviving systematic attempted murder made her want to study microorganisms that lived in acid. Yaldrin met with her one final time before she departed. Why did you let the hegemony survivors leave? She considered the question with the kind of thoughtfulness that suggested she had been expecting it. Because mercy is also a human trait. We are very good at violence when necessary, but we are better at choosing when it is necessary. They learned that was sufficient. And if they had not learned, she smiled and Yaldrin understood why the hegemony soldiers had fled. Then I suppose the galaxy would have needed a new case study on human capability. But they did learn, so everyone gets to avoid finding out exactly how creative my species becomes when genuinely motivated. The investigation concluded with a single recommendation that was immediately classified and distributed to every major government. Humans are not warriors, they are survivors. This is infinitely more dangerous. The galaxy nodded, updated its databases, and quietly began treating humanity with the kind of nervous respect normally reserved for unexploded antimatter, because they had finally learned what Earth had been trying to teach the universe for 4 billion years. The most dangerous species is not the one that looks threatening, it is the one that refuses to die when you think you have killed it, then spends however long necessary figuring out how to return the favor. Humans called this survival. The galaxy called it terrifying. Both were correct.